Hi, I'm Eric B., and we're down here in New Orleans. Welcome to the 7 Days of Satch, presented to you by Chevron. This presentation with Ricky Riccardi is produced by French Quarter Festival, Inc. Special thanks to all partners and sponsors, including Chevron, New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park, GE, Jack Daniels, Abita Brewing Company, WWL-TV Channel 4, New Orleans Jazz Museum, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and NOLA.com. WWOZ 90.7 FM, and Offbeat Magazine. 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of Satchmo SummerFest, dedicated to the life and legacy in the music of New Orleans' own Louis Satchmo Armstrong. This year, we cannot be live with you, so we've joined forces with a few of our partners to produce a multi-platform celebration in honor of Satch. Coming up next, get a chance to hang at home with Louis as Ricky Riccardi with his Louis Armstrong House Museum take you on a tour of Armstrong's homes in Queens, New York, including a segment from the museum's That's My Home virtual exhibit.
Hello, dear friends. Satchmo SummerFest. Ricky Riccardi here. Absolutely heartbroken that I cannot be there with you. This is the first time in a long time. I have not missed the Satchmo SummerFest since 2008. Um, to not be there, I mean, it just doesn't feel the same. But even in the middle of a pandemic, I remain all Armstrong all the time. And I was asked by the crew over at Satchmo SummerFest to spend a little time here as we do this kind of virtual festival, taking you a little bit behind the scenes of my day job, the Louis Armstrong House. Um, it's kind of funny because we're all stuck at home. Many of us have been home for months. And Louis Armstrong spent a lot of time at home as well. And when he was there, he amassed, what's become the world's largest archives for any single jazz musician. And that's what I'm in charge of. A lot of people might know me coming down to Satchmo Summerfest, showing videos, talking about books or CDs, or even beating up pianos or whatever else is around, eating a lot. But my day gig, my paycheck is being in charge of the Armstrong archives. And so for the next half hour, part of this is going to be turned over to a 2018 video of me giving a tour of the Armstrong House. We are closed because of the coronavirus. And, the museum is located in the unfortunately named town of Corona, Queens, which is might need a new name for that. But yeah, so when you hear me talk about Corona, there's two different kinds. I'm talking about Corona, Queens. So I don't know when the museum's going to open up again, but we are celebrating Louis here for his August 4th birthday, and I think it would be fun to kind of go behind the scenes and take a look at the museum. And when this is all behind us, you're all invited to come up and check it out. But before I turn it over to me, which sounds bizarre, I want to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing since the pandemic hit. We closed down on March 14th, and me and our little staff, we all looked at each other and said, well, what now? And um, Sarah Rose, who some of you might remember, she was down there a couple of years ago. She was our archivist for a long time. She had the idea that maybe we should do a virtual exhibit. And our acting director, Jeff Rosenstock, went one step further and said, well, why don't we make the theme home? Because, we have this collection, we have a house, and everyone's at home. It could be fun. I named it That's My Home based on Lewis's 1932 recording, and we were off and running. I should mention that none of this would have been possible without a $2.7 million grant that we received from Robert F. Smith's Fund to Foundation back in 2016, which was for the complete and total digitization of our collections. And so even though I've been home since March and I have not, traveled to Queens, because of digitization, because of the cloud, I have access to everything. So me and the team, I mentioned Sarah Rose, also Highland Harris, Adriana Philstrip, who was also down there in New Orleans 2 years ago. We've been putting our heads together and putting together what we call virtual exhibits. And if you allow me, I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit of what I am talking about, because it's been a really, really exciting turn of events. I should mention right off the bat that if I had to choose, I would not want a coronavirus, obviously. I would much rather be in Queens at the Armstrong House, at the archives. But being what it is, this is really a silver lining. If you notice, the URL is virtualexhibits.louisarmstronghouse.org. And so you'll see right off the bat there's virtual exhibits, Satch's tracks, Hanging with Highland virtual tour, and a couple other things here. Um, let's dive in. If you go to the main page, virtual exhibits, see all these here? That's my home. Introduction, eulogizing the chops. Louis Armstrong warms up. A chop session, the Schlewitz interview. These are all what we're calling the virtual exhibits using our collections, using photographs, newspaper clippings, the reel-to-reel tapes, anything that we have in the archives to tell these stories. So for example, eulogizing the chops, Louis Armstrong warms up. We get asked all the time, especially from trumpet players, what is Louis's routine? How did he practice? Well, if you know your offstage Armstrong, he was never too far from his tape recorder. And whether he was on the road, whether he was at home, that tape recorder was usually running. And usually, not usually, but we have these amazing tapes of him playing along. And so you can see we have photos. We tell little stories in between the photos. It's almost like a guided tour. But, maybe the most exciting part is you hit the play button. The sound of Louis Armstrong. So that's one entire exhibit just about him warming up. Satchmo SummerFest favorite, Dan Morgenstern, who's turned 90 years old last year, still sharp as ever. We still correspond, and I know he misses everybody down there as well. He spent a 2.5 hour session with Louis in 1965 in his den, along with Jack Bradley, and the three of them polished off a bottle of Schlewitz Plum Brandy, and Jack snapped photos, Dan recorded it, and you can get right in there like you were in the house with Jack Bradley's photos and with the entire 2.5 hour. The closest to
I said, well, some cats said, was supposed to keep you over there. It's all right, as long as it doesn't blow. I don't care.
So check that one out. This became one of our most popular ones, From Stravinsky to Gizzard, Louis Armstrong's record collection. A glimpse of what did Louis Armstrong listen to. And, it's all here. There's stuff about opera, Thelonious Monk. You'll see his handwritten tape catalogs, Miles Davis, his copies of Al Jolson records, Miles Davis records, Louis and his tapes. And each one of these is filled, Louis introducing Caruso.
Here's Mr. Caruso. He's singing a beautiful thing called "Am I Prairie Like a Dream."
And so that's a fun one. I could do this for everyone, but the URL again is up there, virtualexhibits.louisarmstronghouse.org. But just to show you, this one here is about Armstrong's collages. This one here is all about his relationship to his neighbors in Queens. This one has been very timely. It's called "I'm Still Louis Armstrong Colored," Louis Armstrong in the Civil Rights Era. It has a lot of stuff. Louis discussing race with friends, telling off Eisenhower, talking about Selma, Martin Luther King. A really, really deep look at Louis and race from all angles. The story of Lucille, who sometimes gets obscured from Armstrong, but she is really the reason why we have a house and archive. So what's her backstory? We have a post about that. The 50th anniversary of the album Louis Armstrong and His Friends passed at the end of May. So we did a 4-part series about that because it's such a timely album. Armstrong recording "We Shall Overcome" and Everybody's Talking and Give Peace a Chance and all this stuff. What a Wonderful World. So we went really deep, a 4-part series of how he prepared for it, session by session, lots of rare Jack Bradley photos. And this was a fun series. We went through one of Armstrong's scrapbooks that he made towards the end of his life. It's a 3-part series where I went page by page and gave descriptions of what was going on, context, dates. I'll click this one just to show you. but what is inside these Armstrong scrapbooks. This one has collages, telegrams, photographs. There's Doc Severinsen, Lauren Bacall, Bing Crosby, Nelson Rockefeller, more collages, Bobby Hackett, Mahalia Jackson, one of my favorite photos. So, it's like if you had visited me at the archives and I pulled out our scrapbook, you kind of get that same experience. And then right up to the finish line, celebrating Louis's birthday, and maybe my favorite entry, the story of Louis's final tape. As you see there, that writing is from Louis Armstrong. Last tape recorded by Pop, 7/5/71. It's a tape that was found in his reel-to-reel tape deck the night before he passed away, and what was the music that he listened to. I won't spoil it, but check it out. It's all there, including links to the music, so you can kind of listen along. Some of these other things, hang in with Highland. Highland Harris is our gift shop manager, but he's also a drummer. He's an educator, a jazz historian, and every week Highland and I sit down and talk about something, and we film it, thanks to the magic of Zoom. So we've had some 2 or 3 minute conversations. We've had a few 20 or 30 minute conversations. But if you like, there's me, Highland, and Roy Haynes. If you want to hear a couple of cats talking about Louis till they're blue in the face, check out that series. And then Satch's Tracks was a spin-off of the What's in Louis Armstrong's record collection. And every week we try to take a peek in what did Louis listen to. So there's a Jelly Roll Morton record, Bing Crosby with Duke Ellington, Rachmaninoff, Bix Beiderbecke, Louis's Town Hall concert. He reads the liner notes for that one. This was, again, very timely. Louis reading the Gettysburg Address. And again, I provide the context, but at the end, you can listen to the audio.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
It's beautiful. So now you know. Now you know what's been keeping me busy, and I'm not kidding. Some of you know that I live in Toms River, New Jersey. I usually commute 2.5 hours one way to work every day. I've been doing that for almost 11 years. And so I haven't commuted since March, which has probably added several years to my life, but busier than ever. And I'm not going to lie, this is the kind of thing that would not have happened normally. So again, it's not like hooray for the pandemic. No, don't take it that way. But making lemonade out of lemons, it's really been exciting, and it's showcasing our collection in a whole new way. And so check that out, virtualexhibits.louisarmstronghouse.org. And I'm going to hand over the rest of my allotted time to the 2018 edition of Ricky Riccardi to show you a little bit, sneak peek, you could say, inside the Armstrong house, and maybe even a little of the archives as well. Thank you again for letting me do this. And as always, find me on Facebook, find me anywhere. I'm easy to find. And well, let's start planning for next year. 120th anniversary of his birth, 50th anniversary of his death. Hope coronavirus is long behind us, and we'll have a good time. So thank you, love you, and Pops is tops.
Through this door that Louis Armstrong and his wife Lucille came in for decades between 1943 and Lucille's passing in 1983. We're going to ring the doorbell and head on in. So through this door, this is the living room. So the woman over my shoulder is Louis Armstrong, and we have to thank her very much today, because without her, there might not be a Louis Armstrong House Museum. Lucille was a Cotton Club dancer. She was already in show business when she met Louis Armstrong, and she became the 4th Mrs. Armstrong when they got married in October of 1942. Their honeymoon was 6 straight months of one-nighters, and Lucille said, "This is not what I signed up for." She wanted an actual home. So, having spent part of her childhood in Corona, Lucille was still in touch with some people on the block, found out this home was for sale. The asking price was $8,000, and she put the down payment on it in March of 1943, and never told Louis Armstrong. He's out on tour, one-nighter after one-nighter. Finally, 8 months go by. The tour is over. It's time for Louis Armstrong to return home. And when he's getting ready, Lucille goes, listen, I need to tell you something. We have a home. I purchased the place. It's in Corona. Armstrong, I never heard of Corona. At first he was livid. He said, how are you paying for it? She said, I have my own bank account, but now that you know, you can take over the payments. So finally, Louis comes home. All he has is the address, 3456 107th Street. He gives it to the cab driver, tells Lucille, have breakfast waiting for me. So it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Lucille's waiting, and she's waiting, and she's waiting. Finally, she looks out the window over there, sees a cab outside, and sees Louis Armstrong kind of arguing with this cab driver. And they're pointing, and they're talking, and gesturing. And Louis, who had grown up in such poverty, he had never really had a home before. And when the cab driver pulled up, this was like a mansion to Louis. So he took one look at it and he told the cabbie, oh man, quit kidding, take me to the house, the address I wrote down. The cab driver said, this is the place. So they were out there staring at it. Sure, this was the wrong house. Finally, Lucille opened the door, said, what are you doing out there? Why don't you come in? And Louis came in. He took one look at the inside, fell so in love with it, he actually invited the cab driver back in. They had breakfast, and that was it. Till the day he died in 1971, Louis Armstrong refused to leave here, refused to move. And these were the years of his greatest popularity, the years of Ambassador Satch, when he was touring the world, doing State Department tours. Just one of the most iconic, globally recognized figures in the planet. And the living room kind of showcases that. You will see knickknacks from India, from Japan, a vase from France, paintings from Africa. This whole room screams Armstrong, the international symbol. Of course, there is the man of the house right there. That is a painting that was done by an African-American artist named Calvin Bailey. And it was based on a very famous photograph by Anton Bruhl that originally appeared in Vanity Fair in 1935. And you kind of get everything you need to know about Louis Armstrong in that one photo. There's the handkerchief, there's the giant smile, and the trumpet. And Armstrong, we have photos of him standing in front of it. He was very proud of that portrait, overlooking the house. This portrait of Lucille was done by a famous artist named Samuel County, and you can see how regal Lucille looks. I mean, she was, many of the friends referred to her as Lady Armstrong. And a lot of the fingerprints in this house have, Lucille all over it. The wallpaper in every room. After a while, Lucille kind of got the itch to move somewhere bigger and a little more lavish. Louis wouldn't leave. He loved the kids. He loved the neighborhood. So with his permission, Lucille hired an interior decorator, Morris Grossberg. And every few years, they would do a major renovation, knocking down walls and putting up new wallpaper and buying new furniture. So she was happy with that. Louis was happy just to have a home. And nowadays, his most famous song, his most iconic song is What a Wonderful World. And people always ask us, what was he thinking about when he sang What a Wonderful World? And we have the answer on a tape recording I'm going to play for you right now, where he talks about every time he sang What a Wonderful World, he thought about his neighborhood right here in Corona.
So wonderful world. There's a zillion people done that tune the way I did it when I felt it. Because there's so much in Wonderful World that brings me back to my neighborhood where I live in Corona, New York. Of course, Long Island, everybody know where that is. And Lucille and I, ever since we married, we've been right there in that block. And everybody keeps their little homes up like we do. And it's just like one big family. I saw 3 generations come up in that block. And they're all with their children, the grandchildren. They come back to see Uncle Satchmo and Aunt Lucille. That's why I can say, I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll never know. And I can look at all them kids' face. And I got pictures of them when they was 5, 6, and 7 years old. And it is a wonderful world.
So that comes from our research collections. We have the world's largest archives devoted to a single jazz musician. And a big core part of that are tapes that Louis Armstrong himself made. He got his first tape recorder in December of 1950. I'm gonna play one more clip. He got his first tape recorder in December 1950. And between that moment until the day he died in July 71, he made hundreds and hundreds of reel-to-reel tapes. Many of them made right here at home in Corona.
At home in Corona, Long Island, New York. February 26, 1956.
February 6th.
Correction. February 6, 1926. I'm sitting up here with Lucille, she's fixed.
1956.
Pardon me, folks. Lucille, I'm messing with my eye, you know.
So if you're here at the end of that tape, Armstrong says, "Pardon me, folks." He was very aware of his popularity, and he was very proud of his rags to riches story, and he wanted to be sure that people knew about it. So he made these hundreds of tapes and compiled scrapbooks and saved photographs, knowing that one day, years after he passed away, people were going to want to know how he lived. Moving down the hallway here, another favorite room is this very lavish bathroom, which when you look at it, it's kind of a typical small Queens bathroom, but there's mirrors from floor to ceiling. There's a marble tub, a marble sink, gold-plated fixtures everywhere. And again, you have to know about Armstrong's background. He grew up so poor in New Orleans that they had an outhouse in the backyard when he was growing up. And so having a bathroom like this, which was featured in Time magazine, it was featured on NBC News, it was a sign for Armstrong that he had come a long way. The dining room of the Armstrong house, again, we have photos of Armstrong sitting at this very table eating his favorite food. His favorite cuisine, of course, was red beans and rice, real New Orleans kind of poor folks food. And he would even sign letters sometimes, "Am red beans and ricely yours." And we have another audio clip of Armstrong, Louis and Lucille having dinner in this room in the early 1950s. You'll hear the dogs barking, you'll hear music on the radio, they're eating Brussels sprouts. It's your typical American family at home in the 1950s. And so those meals, or red beans and rice and Brussels sprouts and all, were prepared in this room, the kitchen, which has become everyone's favorite room. It's kind of the kitchen of the future here. It's got the jet age blueprints all over it with the World's Fair in 1964. Obviously an inspiration for Lucille. The kitchen was actually finished in March of 1970, but this striking color blue here, you have the Sub-Zero refrigerator, matches the cabinets, and you have the clock up on the wall there, matches the cabinets. Everything works together. The dishwasher, also the same color. And if you notice, there's a daily use mode and a party use mode, because I'm sure this house saw its share of parties. Even the oven here, there's a double oven with 6 burners on top. And the little card over here reads, "Custom made by Crown for Mr. and Mrs. Louis Armstrong." So this was custom made for their parties. Lucille, again, making the best use of space. We have the can opener is mounted into the wall. There's a blender mounted into the countertop over there. Paper towels and tinfoil are hidden behind these doors. And these cabinets, these are all lacquered wood cabinets with piano hinges done by a company, Kingsway, out of Brooklyn. So it's a very musical kitchen. And like I said, we get people who come here who don't even really care about jazz. They just want to see like a perfectly preserved home. And a lot of people who take this tour take one look at the kitchen and say, "I want that kitchen right now. This would be in 2018. All right, we're going to head to the upstairs portion of the house now. But before we go up, I want to call your attention to this electric stair chair here. and just talk a little bit about Armstrong's grueling life. As much as he loved his home, he loved working even more. And for years, he pushed himself to usually perform about 300 nights a year. If he had too many days off, he would tell his manager, what are you doing? Yeah, I want to keep working. Lucille always told the story about them having an 8-week cruise in 1963, and about 4 weeks in, he had to leave the ship and come home and start playing again. He lived for his audiences, but playing 300 nights a year catches up with you after a while. He had his first heart attack in 1959, and to just illustrate how grueling everything was, his vocalist Velma Middleton died on the road in 1961. His pianist Billy Kyle died on the road in 1966. His clarinetist, Buster Bailey, died on the road in 1967. And finally, Armstrong broke down and had heart trouble and kidney trouble in 1968 and 69, resulting in 2 stints at Beth Israel Hospital. When Armstrong came home, the doctors told him to retire, and he listened for the most part, but every night he would practice his trumpet, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and finally the doctors gave him the blessing to go back to work. And he did for a little bit in 1970, but by 1971 he was having shortness of breath, he was pushing himself too much. He had 2 weeks booked at the Waldorf Astoria, and the doctors told him he could probably die on stage, but Armstrong got into a transported state. And he told his doctor, "Doc, you don't understand. My whole soul is to blow this horn. The people are waiting for me. I cannot let them down." He does the 2 weeks at the Waldorf, 2 shows a night, but 2 days later, major heart attack, needed a tracheotomy to survive. He was in the hospital 8 weeks. He came home in May of 71, and that's when Lucille had the stair chair installed to help him get up the stairs. By June of 71, he was practicing again. And by the end of June, he actually invited the media over here, Daily News, Rolling Stone, Annie Leibovitz, and all these people came, and he played for them. And he promised he was going to go around the world one more time. He always believed his birthday was July 4th. So on July 4th of that year, he had a major party in the brand new garden outside. And on July 5th, he spent the whole day practicing and listening to his own music. The last album he heard that night was his 1956 album with Ella Fitzgerald, Ella and Louis. Album finished, Armstrong came back to this bedroom. This is his master bed where he slept with Lucille, and he died in his sleep, in this bed, in this room, the early hours of July 6, 1971. He probably could have lived another 10, 15 years if he put down the horn and retired. But he always said if he retired, that was an instant recipe for death. He never wanted to sit around and look at 4 walls all day. He wanted to be out there working. So at least he died with this kind of knowledge, feeling like he was going to get back on the stage again. There's also Lucille's kind of prayer corner over here. She was a very devout Catholic. There's a church right on 37th Avenue, Our Lady of Sorrows, and that's where she would worship. There's some statues of saints that they brought back from around the world. There's Lucille's copy of the Bible, a print of Salvador Dali's Crucifixion. Louis, though, he always had the best line. When they would ask him about religion, he would always say, "I was raised a Baptist, I wear a Star of David around my neck, and I'm good friends with the Pope." So he really had everything covered. So from this room, where Armstrong spent some of his final moments, we're going to go into a room where he spent some of his happiest moments, the bathroom. And I say that because of Armstrong's famous fixation with laxatives, which was something that started when he was a kid. Growing up in New Orleans, his mother didn't have access to organic grass-fed beef or anything. Sometimes she would actually go through the garbage and find slightly spoiled food, fix it up, cook it for Louis and his sister, but then she would make a homemade laxative, a physic, give it to Louis and his sister, and tell him, "Keep your stomach clean, keep your stomach clean." Well, after Armstrong grew up, he began buying laxatives, and in the 50s, he took one called Swiss Chris, and he ended up losing about 90 pounds over the next 3 years. And so one year for his Christmas card, he sat on this toilet here, and he sent it out to all of his friends and fans, and it said, "Merry Swiss Chris." And people went crazy. They thought it was hysterical. So he had the picture retaken, and he had a keyhole superimposed on it, and he had a wallet-sized card made that said Satchmo slogan, "Leave it all behind you." This is the room that all the New Yorkers love. It's the walk-in closet. You can imagine Louis always used to dress very sharp. Lucille used to always dress very sharp. So they had this kind of ingenious system made up where they have kind of double the space here, and the whole top half are all on these poles with the hangers up there. And you can only imagine what it must have looked like when it was filled. We do have some of Lucille's Poochie gowns that were donated back to us from one of the neighbors. And there's Louis's scale there where he would chart the Swiss Chris usage. But silver Mylar wallpaper covering every cabinet, covering every drawer, even the insides of every drawer have the same kind of foil looking wallpaper. Yeah, no corner left unturned. So really everything up to this point has had Lucille's fingerprints all over it, but she did give Louis one room that would be his own, that he could have friends and work on his hobbies and do whatever he wanted. That's this room right here, the den. So this is Louis Armstrong's den, the original man cave here. Louis always said that growing up in New Orleans, they would have slept in a room like this. This was the height of luxury. The fact that he had an entire room for his hobbies. And his main hobby, of course, was making these reel-to-reel tapes. The tapes would be stored in that cabinet there. There's 2 Tandberg tape decks over his shoulder, and he had a portable tape deck that would sometimes travel on the road with him. And he made hundreds and hundreds of tapes. When he was done making the tapes, he would design collages. This is a facsimile. We have all the originals at Queens College, but he would cut out newspaper clippings, photographs, scotch tape them to the boxes, and then Armstrong, the archivist, would number each individual reel. So this is his handwriting. You see reel 70 has Martin Luther King's life story, his funeral coverage, has an episode of the Dick Cavett Show, music by Lionel Hampton, Les Height, Lawrence Brown. Back there, reel 112 has one of his own concert performances by the All-Stars with Trummy Young and Billy Kyle and Velma Middleton. So he was cataloging everything. And this was the room where all the Queens royalty would come. At the time, Dizzy Gillespie lived 1 block away on 106th Street. Clark Terry lived down the street. Clark always talked about how he and Dizzy would call each other and say, let's go visit Pops and get our batteries charged. And they would sit across from him, and he would sit behind the desk and tell jokes and tell stories and just kind of hang out. So I want to play a clip right now from the tapes of Louis showing some friends this catalog. And he's demonstrating how he makes these tapes and has this entire room. He says, Lucille gave me a den. And then he stresses the importance of listening to all kinds of music, including the Beatles.
I put it index. So I index all the numbers and give them all the number. And then my Lucille fixed something I never had in my life before. She gave me a room and made a den out of it. You know what I mean? That really knocked me out because we couldn't afford no den, and them other days we better sleep in that room. Now I look at all my tapes around the walls and just pick out what I want to hear. How does it feel? Well, it's got to feel good. I mean, I don't ask much in life. I mean, those are the needed things. She know that would be my life in music. So when I can hear every record I ever made, all I got to do is look in the little book and put my finger on it, and I buy records. That's why I tell you. I buy everybody's records. I got the Beatles. I got everybody. And they say, well, what do you think about the Beatles? I say they're great. They got a little beat there. You know what I mean? And it's all right. And, okay, that's all right. And only get a haircut. You see, now we got to be not too partial to one kind of music. You got to appreciate all kind of music. That's what I'm trying to put in your head. Listen to all kind of music.
We are in Benjamin Rosenthal Library in Queens College here in Flushing, New York, right off Casino Boulevard, short drive away from Corona, where Louis Armstrong lived. Many people have been to the Louis Armstrong House Museum. Not many people have been to our other half, which is right here, home of the world's largest archives for any single jazz musician. I'm going to take you inside the library right now and show you the research collections of the Louis Armstrong House Museum. So follow me. So the Louis Armstrong Archives here opened to the public in 1994. The story is in 1983, Lucille Armstrong passed away suddenly, and she had left the house, which was already declared a National Historic Landmark, to the city of New York. And the city of New York needed someone to take over the house. And Queens College had just started a top-notch jazz program with Jimmy Heath, Donald Byrd, and Sir Roland Hanna. They were building Benjamin Rosenthal Library, and they're only about 5 miles away from where the Armstrongs lived. So Queens College made a push for it, and they made an agreement with the Armstrong estate in 1986. And so the first order of business was to pack up all of the material in Louis Armstrong's house. That included manuscripts and photographs and scrapbooks and trumpets. All that stuff was brought here in 1991. There was about 72 cartons of stuff. And they hired an archivist. His name was Michael Cogswell. And Michael, his job in the beginning, he had 3 years to go through all this stuff, organize Louis' tapes, organize the photographs, the newspaper clippings, the magazines. Finally, in 1994, the archives opened to the public, and at the time, it was just the Armstrong collection, everything found in the house, which was monumental, and it really went a long way into changing the way people viewed Louis Armstrong. It really changed Armstrong's scholarship once people could hear his tapes, read his letters, read his private correspondence and his unpublished manuscripts. Michael, at the time, then became director of the entire Louis Armstrong House Museum organization, and he made the decision to keep on collecting. We could have stopped with just Louis's stuff, but we figured let's keep going. So we have solicited donations and acquisitions. We keep on getting stuff. A week does not go by where stuff does not come in, whether it's letters, concert programs, more photographs, unissued recordings, everything is still coming to the archives. Plus we have acquired some monumental collections, private collections. We have the world's largest collection of Armstrong material, the Jack Bradley collection. We have Europe's largest collection of Armstrong material, the Josta Hageloff collection. We have a collection from Germany. We have a collection, the Phoebe Jacobs collection. All these collections, 12 collections in all, devoted to Louis Armstrong. So all of that is here at Queens College, plus at the House Museum, everything at the house is considered part of the collection. Every painting, every lamp, every ashtray, everything has a catalog number. So when you add it all up together, it's the world's largest archives for any single jazz musician. Now we're going to go into the inner sanctum here, the stacks, and I'll show you some real treasures from the collection. So I've talked a lot about Louis's tapes. He got his first reel-to-reel tape deck in 1950. He made hundreds of tapes, and these tapes are all here. They've all been digitized, so you can make an appointment and hear the contents of the tapes, which are stunning. Armstrong being interviewed in candid conversation, arguing with his wife, telling dirty jokes, advocating for marijuana. It's all his whole life, venting about racism. It's all on these tapes, hundreds and hundreds of tapes. But the other neat thing that people didn't know about until Queens College took over is that Armstrong was designing collages on each box. So here's one example where he obviously had 4 copies of the same photograph, and so he cut out 3 of the heads, made a little quartet of Armstrongs, and then Scotch tape, just covered and covered and covered with Scotch tape. And that is his handwriting, Reel 163. This one has opera singing and recordings by the Milt Hinton combo. And then he would catalog this. We have his catalogs for Reel 163. You can read what's on the tape. You can order it. But the collages themselves have gone around the world. They were a part of a Smithsonian traveling exhibit. A handful are in New Orleans right now at the New Orleans Jazz Museum. There's a coffee table book devoted to him, a whole side of Armstrong that people did not know about until Queens College took over. These are all tapes on the left side. Over here we have Louis Armstrong's record collection, probably about 2,000 records. He listened to all kinds of music. There's jazz. There's old-time jazz, King Oliver and Jelly Roll Morton, but there's also Miles Davis and Dave Brubeck. He listened to the Beatles. He listened to Frank Sinatra. Tons of classical music and opera. He really loved opera. But by far his most famous, by far his favorite artist was himself. He loved to listen to himself. He knew he was great. He would always record his band performing and listen back to those performances and study them. And this is an album of his old Hot Fives and Hot Sevens recordings from the 1920s. And that's a handwritten note from Armstrong. This is recorded. It's a note to himself, meaning that he had already dubbed this music to tape, so he didn't need to carry the records around anymore. But this is just one of thousands and thousands of records that we have here. Also books, I'll show you a quick book here. All the books found in the Armstrong house, a lot of them were gifts to Louis and Lucille. This is Famous American Negroes by Langston Hughes, and it is inscribed in the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen, especially for Louis Armstrong, with my admiration and high regard. Sincerely, Langston Hughes. So a lot of history in these stacks right now. But all the books, magazines, newspaper clippings, scrapbooks, letters, personal papers, three-dimensional objects. It continues around this way. We have sheet music. Armstrong had a big band for many years, and he broke up the big band and saved all the arrangements. We have his later arrangements. Probably his most iconic song nowadays is What a Wonderful World. And we have the original part. We have the entire arrangement, and this is the original vocal part that Louis Armstrong held in his hands in the studio on August 16th, 1967. When he recorded the song, I don't think he could have predicted at the time that this, of all of his songs, would become his most famous one, but it did. And of course, the first question people have is, what about the trumpets? How many trumpets do you have? The answer to that question is 7. We have 1 trumpet on display at the house. We have 1 trumpet on display here. We have 1 trumpet traveling right now. It's at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. But this case right here has 4 more trumpets. And I'm going to put on my white gloves and tell you a little bit more about these horns. The earliest trumpet we have is from December 1933. So Armstrong was 32 years old. He was performing in London at the time. And this is the Louis Armstrong Special, which was made by Selmer out of Paris, purchased in London. It says Louis Armstrong Special right now, right there. Beautiful engraved horn, gold bell, but a silver trumpet. Probably one of the last silver trumpets Louis Armstrong played. 6 months after he got this horn, King George V of England gave Louis Armstrong a gold-plated Selmer trumpet that said "Property of Louis Armstrong," and that became one of Louis's prized possessions. That's actually the horn that is on display at the House Museum. But this is the earliest one we have. Selmer was Armstrong's brand of choice. They continued making horns for him until the end of his life. This one is from 1958. And again, stunning engraving. It says Louis Satchmo Armstrong, and the engraving goes all the way down in the bell. Just a magnificent work of craftsmanship. And we treat them like working horns. We oil the valves, we wipe them down, we polish them, we only handle them with gloves. And we don't really advertise this much, but when established trumpet players come here, we tell them to bring their mouthpiece and we let them play. And it's a pretty magical experience hearing these horns come alive again. In 1962, Selmer's rival, LeBlanc, they tried wooing Armstrong over. They made him a custom horn with his autograph. That is Louis Armstrong's signature in raised gold, the Satchmo Louis Armstrong. And they put that in raised gold, and they had this whole beautiful horn made. They gave this to him in 1962, and we have photos of him, receiving it and a letter from the company. But Armstrong remained a Selmer man. He kept the horn, he saved it, he was very proud of it. But we have his final Selmer trumpet from the 1960s. Just a regular gold-plated trumpet. I think he was touched by the engraving and all, but most photos he tended to play just a kind of a plain gold-plated horn. Really nothing plain about it. For any trumpet players out there, Armstrong preferred balanced action trumpets, so the valves are dead center, leading to a more balanced feel than your customary trumpet. K modified. It's the way he liked them, so Selmer was happy to make Armstrong happy. But this was the horn you would hear on Hello Dolly and all those great recordings from the 1960s. So, of course, you cannot play a trumpet without a mouthpiece, and so I pulled some mouthpieces. We have about 15 mouthpieces, and most of them are custom. This one here says Satchmo. If you could read that, it's a Satchmo. It's a Schilke mouthpiece. And this one has a date, June 30th, 1957. Satchmo. Most of the horns have a little engraving of some sort. This one is a Giardinelli. This is Giardinelli, New York, and this is Louis Armstrong. Now, I am not a trumpet player, but we invite trumpet players to come here all the time, and they all have a million conspiracy theories. And you know, one of the takeaways is the more you study the mouthpieces, and they're pretty different. So some trumpet players are obsessed with the equipment, but Armstrong did not seem to be that way. You know, every time you hear a Louis Armstrong recording, he always sounds the same. So for him, his sound was internal. It was not really coming from these mouthpieces. Yeah, they helped him. I'm sure he had his favorites, but his sound was unlike anything else and could only come from within.